What's going on, YouTube? White Paul Brian here, back again with another video. And I know, like my last video, I mentioned that it had been a minute, so I'm trying to play a little bit of catch up here, give you guys a little bit of content, and just some more, of the recent kind of wave. I feel like my last video, I really liked that a lot. I kind of felt a lot more comfortable sharing more of my personal, experiences, philosophies, even things that have been more recent that I'm sure some of you guys will relate to. And, even though my point of my channel is to be, I want to say positive, I don't really like positive. I would say just optimistic and essentially hoping for the best outcome, regardless of what may be the drawbacks that may keep you planted or may keep you stagnant from moving forward, or things that keep you fearful. And one thing that me and my friends have been joking about recently is the Magazine Dreams movie with Jonathan Majors. It was shot and recorded like 2 years ago. However, because he got into some legal trouble with him putting his hands on a girl and that whole mess, it was delayed for about 2 years and it just recently released. So if you guys want to know or watch the movie, stop watching because I'm definitely going to ruin it. Some spoilers are going to be definitely here. So, go watch the movie, pause to go watch the movie. If you don't care, then, obviously stick around, just giving you guys a warning and a heads up before you start continuing listening. So, anyways, in the movie, Jonathan Majors is playing as an amateur bodybuilder, not natty, of course, but he's just a loner kind of guy, very socially awkward, and taking care of his grandfather. And from everybody that I've heard watch the movie, it's an incredibly uncomfortable watch, right? Like you're watching and it's kind of like a car crash. You are just squeamish and quenching the whole time. You can't look away because the reality is that to some level, to some extent, especially for men that are into fitness or bodybuilding or have had any kind of pursuit that is physical, they have had some the truth and the reality is that you see some of yourself in the movie, right? Maybe not until the fullest extent, maybe not even 30%, but there is a sliver at the very least that you see yourself within the movie. Obviously within certain parts, and there's a part where like he gets sexually assaulted as well. And some of you may have seen that scene with with Michael Hearn. In the movie they call him Brad Vongelhorn or whatever that is. So, the movie is just, it's not a bodybuilding movie, but I was really appreciative that they had those elements in there because it kind of reflects this, a lot of the modern day escape, like a lot of the advice that people give to other people, guys in particular. Go to the gym, make sure you get into your best shape, work on yourself. God, I can't stand hearing that, and not because it's a wrong thing. It's just because, so a lot of times it's not so much that you need to focus on yourself in particular. You actually, I'm not saying you need to focus on other people, but that's just one piece of it. Yeah, focusing on yourself. It's not just focusing on yourself. Yeah, you need to focus on yourself, of course. Like, let yourself freaking perish and die. Like, why would you say that? Anyways, in the movie, there's just a lot of elements that even I personally relate to. A lot of you guys know my story at this point. Very fit, on skinny kid, whatever, and socially awkward as well. I don't think that a lot of people realize that as much as I say it, I don't know if it'd be easily conceptualized because sometimes it's even hard for me to see myself as somebody that used to operate in that space. And I see it sometimes. I see slivers of how I operate. If I'm hanging around certain type of people, they'll bring that out of me because I feel uncomfortable and nervous, and it'll just kind of put me back in that state. And I don't really like that. I like to feel unshackled and free to say and do whatever I want in a sense. At the same time, I kind of respect the company of those around me, and I don't like to necessarily make people that I love and get along with, not just get along with, but I love, uncomfortable in that sense. If it's harmless, of course. But anyways, my whole point there is that I don't, I don't know, I don't see myself in that way anymore. And in that movie, I kind of saw pieces where I was like, wow, I really got so addicted to the gym process, like to the point where I would carry a gallon of water everywhere I went, like every single day. And it was my goal, my mission to carry a gallon of water. And I became known as a guy on my campus among several people as that guy that carries a gallon of water everywhere. It got to that point. Also, just cooking meals and tracking and, not going out as much. And that kept me on honestly, on a somewhat of a righteous path. But at the same time, it kept me very rigid and it kept me very in this weird spot. I don't know how to describe it. That's why in the movie, it's so incredibly awkward. And there's also that scene in the movie where I don't know why, but a lot of guys have had this experience where you'll talk to a really cute girl or a girl that you really hit it off with. And the moment you can't bring yourself to ask the girl out or ask her for her number, so you'll leave. And then as you're leaving or when you leave, you'll be like, no, I need to get that girl's number. You'll come back and then you'll ask for the girl's number or, ask her out, whatever your intentions are. And I've had that experience more than a couple times for sure. I think it's just that there's that fear that of the rejection in the moment, and it's kind of like you're getting a second wind, and you come back to it. And the fact that he asked her out in front of everybody, I've done that before, and I put a girl on the spot in that sense, like in not in front of a crowd, but in a public setting where definitely people were hearing. And in that moment, it's so weird because I don't feel the same fear that I felt when I'm thinking about it, right? That doesn't even exist in that moment. I'm just focusing on completing the action. And even after the fact, after it's over, because the moment is done and the rejection or whatever happens is there, it's like, it's over. That's it. On to the next one. Um, I don't, I don't, I guess I can see why for a lot of people it would only be a one time watch. Honestly, I think for me it'll be a one time watch because the elements of that movie are incredibly dark and it's not like it has enough substance for you to kind of shut your brain off. It kind of always keeps you actively engaged. But I kind of want to also more talk about the characters, right? Like think of Killian himself, right? His background, right? He's from a household that his dad killed his mom. And so a lot of people don't realize there's a lot of subtle elements in this movie, right? To help you understand and describe the psychology of how he comes to be this person, aside from just, you know, how the movie places him. And they give you really subtle hints because they want the audience to, relate to this in a sense or try to understand it themselves. But essentially, Killian is from a broken household, right? His parents die at a very early age. His dad kills his mom. There's a lot of physical abuse. Him seeing his mom always being physically abused, and him as a boy not being able to protect his mother has him in this very. He's always has this sense of weakness to himself. He feels like he can't do anything about his situations. He can't do anything about his problems, and it's very like. No, honestly, I relate. There was man. My mom was like she dated a lot of different men, or I want to say a lot. I'm not trying to put her on blast, but I definitely had like different levels of influence as far as stepfathers in my life. Three exactly in that amount, and so I understand the instabilities that happened there. But what I'm trying to get to is that in Killian's sense of him feeling weak, he felt like he couldn't protect his mom, and deep down that his mom was killed because of him, right? That's really what the movie starts to get down to if you pay attention and realize. And he goes live with his grandparents, assumingly his pawpaw or his grandfather, and his grandfather, I'm assuming at some point allows him to watch wrestling or see wrestling, right? And you hear in the movie how he was a fan of wrestling, and I feel like wrestling and bodybuilding definitely have this, convergence of worlds joining. They kind of are in similar spaces, but they don't exactly call to one another directly, but they do indirectly, and it becomes a great influence in his life. You could see that, and I'm sure that's him seeing how strong these guys were and him not having that role model, you know, have had that effect on him to see, okay, this is the guy I want to be, because I won't let anybody, allow me to feel weak again, right? And then you have the, dreams of Olympia, right? Because that's the ultimate, deep down, that's his form of acknowledgement, right? He just wants to be acknowledged. He wants to see everybody see how great he is and how much work he's put in, because he's so focused and obsessed with his goal that it doesn't actually allow him to develop relationships with other people in a normal sense, because you have to sacrifice those things, at least in his mind, in order to attain and achieve those things. And I think that a lot of men actually relate to this, and that's what's so uncomfortable about it. They just see it in this movie form, and it's so uncomfortable to watch, because you're like, what the hell? But like I said, it's a string that calls, it tugs on you, because you're just like, man, this is a it kind of hits somewhat close to home. I can't argue, whatever. Maybe it doesn't even for some of you guys, but I would say for at least a good part of the audience that I would think watch the movie there, it does. It is a sad movie in a sense, but it does have a good ending. And a lot of people say that, man, I wish the ending was different. But you have to understand that, like, it's a parallel to life as well. And we have different things happen to us that we wish could have happened differently, but they just happen in that way. And the best thing that happens is us moving away from the situation or bettering the situation. What do they say? The saying is, the best time you could have started was yesterday. The second best time is today. And that's a true parallel to life. And he realizes that towards the end of the movie, like, man, I've done all this harm and damage to my life, and it hasn't really amounted to nothing. It's only caused me more and more suffering. The more I isolate myself, I become obsessed with this dream and this vision and this goal. It's so stupid. I try to have control over everything, and I realize I have control over nothing. Um, and I think a lot of people just, roll over and fall. It's so crazy because the symbolicism of him having so much control, and he just starts realizing that he starts having no control, and it's this constant sense of regaining the control that he thought he had this entire time, when he really didn't have, or where the little control he thought he had, starts to mean nothing to him. And because, right, it gets taken away from him, it gets destroyed from him, but by his own doing. He goes ahead and destroys our hardware store, because as an emotional guy, right, he wants to do what's best for his family. He doesn't want to seem weak, and he wants to protect his family from people who want to abuse him, right? This constant sense of wanting to be wanting to seemingly be a strong person, and leading through some kind of emotional sense, because that's what he saw. I'm sure his grandpa also had to endure. His grandpa was a Vietnam vet. I'm sure there were things there where his grandpa was like, and he even says it. He's like, I forgot what his grandpa says exactly. He's like, obviously his grandpa was always supportive there, and he never really listened to his grandpa, because his grandpa is just like, it kind of just makes sense. I feel like I'm somebody who, I can hear that I'm proud of you, even from my own family members, but I don't really register it, because my sense of, at least at some points, my sense of validations, it used to come from people that were not internal to my family, because, you know, it kind of comes full circle where you start to realize you don't need much support other than from the people that are actually close to you already, and you don't realize that they actually know you more than everybody else. And so you want this validation and this acknowledgement from people who you have created this identity to, there's like this impression or this character, and you want validation from this character, and it's just a creation. It's not really you, right? So, you start to become super disappointed, and it starts to super hurt. That's why you can't accept the compliments and the thank yous and the acknowledgments from those that will normally be there from the very beginning. You like those from people who don't know you or know you at all. I think it's also why people who know you wouldn't necessarily support you, like know you very, very closely, don't necessarily support you when you have an endeavor like content creation or production of a system or a product or whatever. because they kind of project that same feeling onto others. And I think that, social media really enables this. When Killian is making that video in his room in his garage, and he's sitting there, he's like prepping 1,000 times over and over, thinking and trying to look at his best in front of the camera to, try to have some kind of notoriety or fame or some kind of acknowledgement of who he is. And he's so desperate for that. And, he ends up just making a 3 hour video. And I'm not sure if he uploaded that or whatever, presumably not. But, at some point, like, I'm sure he had to make clips of it, cuts of it, whatever. And he uploads it and he sees all those hate comments and people are just kind of like ragging him. And, I love this movie because it has so many different messages all at once, right? And so many pieces you could pick apart from. It's like, be kind to people because you really don't know what people are going through. You don't have to be this like yuppie, hey guy, like hope everything's going good and sucking everybody's fucking cock. But at the same time, you do be kind to people. You try to, somebody having a bad day, let them have a bad day, man. As long as they don't do anything that harms you or, you can walk away from. Because at the end of the day, man, people are in some shitty times. Like if you can go somewhere where you have a good job and you're going to have a job tomorrow and it's going to be food in your stomach and somewhere for you to live and, you have a car and things are going good in your life and you have things to be grateful for, you don't have much room to complain about things. And that's kind of where a lot of things get lost in translation for me when, people are, especially, people kind of like have these things where they focus on, women and the red pill and stuff. And don't get me wrong, dude. Like, I think everybody needs to vent and have that space. But when it becomes such a focal point where you can't talk or say anything else about people, and that's all it becomes, you got a problem, man. Like, you have a serious problem. And it's an undiagnosed one. The movie kind of talks about that as well. Like, you throw around the word of the use, incel, and people, having that like as a, I love how like it's become a very popular term and thing to throw around because at one point, I want to say maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that was a very underground YouTube or internet forum word. Similarly with looks maxing, all these things were very, very niche. You had to really be in the crevice of negative space to find where these people were conversing, right? If you ever like realize something, right? You've ever been in a big room, like a big auditorium or a big expo or conference or some kind of big setting, a ballroom or something. And, you're kind of walking around and you start to hear a conversation that really drags your interest. That's kind of how the internet works, right? And then you kind of stay stuck, maybe in that conversation, or you hear enough and you start to chip in, right? Where you start to jump in the conversation. And, and then you keep talking, right? You keep having the parts of that conversation, of that discussion. Now you're a part of that group. Now you're a part of that thinking. Now you're a part of that whatever. So it's very important that you realize, like, what kind of spaces that you integrate yourself in, because, I tell you, like, I don't say I've been in a probably black pill Discord, because it naturally, I need to see what exactly these people are talking about. But then I was like, dude, this is like not, I can't, for the sake of my well-being and my subconscious reality, or my subconscious defining my reality, I can't see this stuff. I can't be around it. I can't hear it. I have this negative affliction to people who speak and think negatively or think pessimistically. I don't like this. I don't like people saying like, well, it's going to give him a best shot. Whatever happens, happens, I guess. I hate that. I hate that, like, dragging your feet with your spirit, dragging your spirit, maybe, so to speak. I don't like that. There's this GIF that I always kind of relate to. It's one of my favorite GIFs, but for those of you who've seen Game of Thrones, it's Jon Snow, and it's a GIF of him in the Battle of the Bastards, where he's kind of run out of all of his options. He's tried to unite people to fight these group of men, and I don't remember the story quite well, so maybe we're a little wrong here. But basically, he's tried his hardest to like really, rally troops to fight these people, and he doesn't have any support the day of, or he has very little support the day of, and he's just sitting there and he's just like seeing a march or hundreds of people rushing at him on horses, and he's just standing there. The only thing that he has is his sword. What do you call it? The place where you like your holster for your sword. And he literally unhooks it and unsheaths the sword, because that is like, he knows he's gonna die. He knows that this is the last time he's gonna fight. But he stands there in front of like hundreds of men, ready to fight, ready to just give it his last willing, dying breath of cause. And there's something about that as men, that we kind of all yearn for that blaze of glory moment, where a lot of our last moments that we kind of idolize, or and we kind of illustrate through media, right? Like Halo Reach, the last mission, it just says survive, and you're left on the planet alone, like, and you're left to think that something's gonna happen, or somebody's gonna come save you, because in video games that's kind of what happens. There's usually a cutscene and things happen, and there's this little mission, and but you start dying, and you get to a certain health, and your helmet starts cracking. I was like, whoa, I've never seen that before. What the hell? A couple minutes goes by, and you're more cracking, and then you get to a certain point where it's just too much. Your character is getting outnumbered by hundreds of elites and hundreds of mobs, and you're dying, you're collapsing, everything's around you, and you're just getting shot up. And then you're like, holy shit, I got the character I've been playing is dead, and that was, you're like, wow, man, like that's so cool, but damn. And it's kind of one of those blaze of glory moments that we yearn for as men. I think deep down. But the only way you could do that is by acknowledging the realities and the brutality of life, right? Square in the face. Like, how some guys, like, I'm sure you've seen it, like they're about to fight, they're squaring up, they're like, punch me right here, punch me right here. You kind of have to like act like that towards life. And you may get punched square in the jaw, and you're just going to have to eat that. Most of the time, the good part about it is you can get up. You can eat a punch to the face, you can take a chink in the armor, and there's really no cost to it. You know what I mean? Life just goes on. But that kind of mentality, that kind of behavior, that character is reserved for, inching on to those moments, right? Think of towards the end of the movie, Killian Maddox, he realizes all this shit is bad for him. He throws away all the steroids, he throws away all the things, and it doesn't really tell you what exactly happens afterward, but it foreshadows that his life takes another direction, and he wants to see better for himself. He realizes the obsession with the bodybuilding has turned him into a monster. It's turned him into a degenerate, which is kind of ironic, considering the fitness focus is supposed to make you this, God amongst men, and all it makes you is a titan. It makes you this strong being at what, I have the world, but I sold my soul, and what's the cost of that thing? And it kind of at one point for me, lifting and all these things, I was so kind of tired of it, because it all seemed in vanity, and focusing on the vanity of it takes you away from the beauty of it, wanting the same recognition, or wanting the validation from the girls that like those kind of bodies, or thinking that that's kind of like bodies that women liked. One thing I realized for me, myself, in that kind of dating area, when I was my leanest or skinniest, whatever, I didn't have the best time attracting girls. It was whenever I was more fluffier, like I am now, weighing more, I guess, and kind of being more loose with my diet, and kind of just treating the gym as like a secondary kind of passion, staying in shape, but not really like trying to progress so much. That's kind of when I actually, because you got to think about it, dude. The gym is cool and you like it and it's keeping you in shape, but it's not your focus, not your life. And sometimes I think about it. I'm like, dude, if I'm trying to do a show, I'm trying to make this a focus of my life. What's really the cost of that? But at the time I was in a relationship, so I kind of had the flexibility to think in that way, and I kind of had to. If I considering this person, like I had to make that space for them in my life. But neither here or there. Now it's now I have the time, now I have the space, and it's something that I really want. Like I really want to kind of push my mindset, my mentality to the limits. I've been, I won't say stuck, but I've been kind of back and forth, swinging around in the space of my physicality for a little bit. I really want to up the ante, and I really want to see how much, because it starts to cost more. You got to sleep more, you got to recover more, you got to be more meticulous with your food. At least for me, I don't have the best genetics or the best things to get away from, but you know, I thank God that He at least grants me the opportunity to do so. And moving forward, I can change. I can do things about my situation. That's where like that's what reinvigorates me. Like I think of all the things, yeah, like it's shit. Like it's not fair. There's people that can just look at ways to grow. They don't have to track. They don't have to do whatever. I don't like. I just don't care about that as much anymore. Yeah, there are momentary thoughts and things where like I'm a human being. I may have the emotional responses of lapses in my thinking where that may be the case. But I very quickly I'm like I don't care. I don't care anymore. I just care about what I can do and focusing on that. I listen to my body and the experiences that my body tells me in the gym, and how much food I should be eating, and like even if my macros aren't hit for the day, and like how my body feels, how's my stomach feeling, you know like when I do a movement, that guy on YouTube said to do it like this, but actually I feel a lot more when I move this way. Or the workout program says 10 to 12 reps, but I actually feel like 12 to 15 will probably be better for me today because I've been feeling a little achy in this area. you know like these things seem like common sense, but when you're so focused on the results and the actionary things, you stick to your plan. So you stop trusting yourself. You stop trusting the things that the person who knows you best, which is yourself. And you know a part of the video I said earlier is like you have this escape to people that barely, like, not to say barely, but they don't know you as well as like your mom or your dad or your family members do. And look, I get it. Like I know some family members are just hard to deal with. Like there are so many people. I don't say so many people, but I feel like in my immediate family, I there starts to become a gap. You start to kind of hit a certain spot where you realize like you have generational curses. You have things that have really bogged your family down. People that have essentially not been there to take point in your family, and your family reaps the results and actions of those things. And unfortunately, it affects everybody differently. I've had to be extremely selfish because that's the requirement of like how I can feel like the sense of control in my life. And I think that's why in the movie with Killian, I can relate a little bit because he's incredibly selfish, right? Like, the only person that he takes care of is Pawpaw, and that's it. He doesn't care about anybody else or care to take care of anybody else, but he's willing to really be extremely loyal for his Pawpaw. And, you know, if you really think about it, his obsession is what's keeping him safe from the avoidance of anything else in his life that can provide any sense of vulnerability, right? Because any sense of vulnerability to him would be like a weakness, and any weakness would be an immediate threat, right? Like, to him or his pawpaw, he would not want to see his pawpaw get hurt. Um, you know, like I said, all the wrestling and all that stuff. A lot of us become inspired by these role models who are seemingly strong figures, but at the end of the day, man, you know, at the end of the scene, it's like, or the end of the movie, he takes Brad's pictures off the wall and he puts a picture of himself up there. And he starts realizing, man, I'm worshiping idols and people that like don't really give a shit about me. They only want to use me. They only want to have me whenever it's convenient for them. And he learns that in the worst way possible. He gets sexually assaulted by a guy he's idolizing. He doesn't understand like how somebody could take advantage of him, that had that halo effect and had that around that. And this is symbolic for not just like sexual assault, but I feel like so many men idolize women, and That's why it pisses them off when they don't get the results that they want. It's okay to be disappointed by something that you thought was going to happen another way, but it's entirely different to, like, deep down worship women. And I feel like that's just a weakness as a guy, because you lust for things, but then you start mentally framing the pictures of them on your wall, right? And so I feel like I've just been looking down. I haven't been looking up. I don't know why I just felt like that, but you just have this this framing of that in your head. And so maybe it's a frontal lobe developing. Maybe it's just me getting older and having more experiences of life. But dude, I kind of realized, like, why am I worshiping other people? Why am I, in some facet of sense, right? Not literally, but why, I should, and you got to be careful, because I feel like I don't like to champion myself, but at some points, like, I feel like I can be less, I feel like I'm too humble sometimes. And, that's kind of like that fear where, you should be proud of yourself, there's a fine line. You shouldn't be prideful, but you should be proud. And you should hold yourself up to that kind of standard. You shouldn't shy away. That's why I say be seen. Don't ignore yourself, put yourself out there for other people to see who you are. And, because, you shouldn't be afraid to, like, show yourself, because you're really hiding, when you hide yourself from the world, you're really hiding you from yourself deep, deep down. You don't even realize it. And that's because you don't, all this talk, like, oh, you love yourself and all this freaking gay stuff. But it's like, I don't say it's true in that sense, but, it is kind of true. You should have a love for yourself, in the sense of that, you come at a higher priority than other people, in the sense of, like, how you should feel worship. You go where you're celebrated, and if there's nowhere for you to be celebrated, then you always will have yourself, and not only just yourself, but God. And that's kind of my philosophy. Again, obviously, hearing some of my videos, you guys know that, I feel like I've leaned more into religion in the past couple of years, because I used to have such a disdain for God and religion, and like, how could God do these things or allow these bad things to happen? And all these people are hypocrites that go to church and believe in Him. But I didn't understand that there is a higher power, because I felt there is a spirit in a higher sense and an essence in that. And I know that a lot of people do too. And I guess in that sense too, like, there was a little bit of shame of me kind of wanting to lean into that, because then it would be, you would now be a part of that. You would be a part of that hypocrisy. But you know what, man? That's like, not to, like, brush off my shoulders any kind of, like, wrongdoings or sin, but you're a human being. I don't want to say, like, you're bound to sin, but how can anybody, like, there's no such thing as like a perfect person. We're all meant to be hypocrites at a certain point, and that shouldn't deny you from being, in a closer relationship with God. But, for those of you who don't see it that way, maybe just a closer relationship with yourself. Just because you've disappointed yourself by not doing the things that you said you were going to do, or accomplishing things that you thought or you set out for yourself, doesn't necessarily mean that you can't still be like, dude, I can still do this. I can still make this happen. This is still within my reach and my area of procurement. I can still allow this to happen in my life. I can still make this a goal. I can still allow people in my circle. I can still change the circumstances of things, because that's the reality. You can always do something about it. It may seem shitty in the moment, but don't get married to that feeling. Get married to the feeling that there is an upside. There is something to hold on to. The feeling of hope. Some people call it, like, coping in that sense. I don't think so. Why? The adjacent thing to coping is hoping. And there's a reason for that, because coping is hoping without any kind of spirit, or any kind of their thumos, or any kind of umph in your sense of urgency, right? Like, that's where that comes from. Because when you hope for something, you also realize the reality of the situation, and many times why or how things kind of came to be. Coping is just saying that those things didn't even matter in the first place. So I really like Magazine Dream, guys. Go check it out. I'm every time I see it on TikTok of the movie, I just send it to my friends, and I kind of low key troll them with it because it's funny. It is kind of like the Jim Cell kind of movie, but it does have a lot of elements that come into play that a lot of people relate to. That's why it's so uncomfortable and hard to watch because it's sad. We see that sadness in our own reality sometimes in different ways, and it shouldn't be something that we shy away from. We should kind of embrace those things because they make us human at the end of the day. And, overall, they do give us hope in spite of bad things happening in our lives. So, guys, I'm going to end the video here. It's been super long, probably my longest video I've ever made. But thank you guys for watching this far if you have. This is White Poe Brian. Thanks for watching, guys. Signing off. Till next time. Peace.